Hey, everybody, welcome back to Winnemac Hockey. Today, we are going to break down the season of the Seattle Kraken, who just completed their inaugural season in the NHL. Let's hop into the video. All right, guys, if you're new to the channel, my name is Dom DeBomb, and I am joined by Jake the Snake and Matt the Brat Cleveland. Guys, as we record this video today, we are only 24 subscribers away from 300, so please consider subscribing to help us reach our goal. All right, now without further ado, let's talk about the Seattle Kraken, and let's begin with part one, the season recap. The Seattle Kraken in their inaugural season did not put up the amount of points and wins that we saw with Vegas a couple of years ago, but the roster was also much, much different than Vegas's. This season, Seattle finished 27, 49, and 6, which was good for 60 points and not dead last in the league. And let's be honest, fellas, it was just a lot of fun watching them play. Even though they didn't win a whole lot of games, it was a lot of fun watching a new team in the NHL and their color scheme. It has really grown on me. Seattle fans, I might be getting a jersey here soon, personally. But fellas, what were you guys' thoughts of the season overall?
Yeah, I think that Seattle, I didn't have high expectations. I think some people might have after Vegas had that miracle run. But Seattle, they didn't get last. So if you're a Seattle fan, you should still have that excitement that you just got a team. You have someone like Matty Beniers coming in. The future is so bright for Seattle hockey.
Matt, what about you? What are your thoughts on Seattle's season?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch. Obviously, it's always fun to watch a new team enter the league, and especially a team like this, as precedented as it was. It was kind of even though you didn't have many expectations on them this year, I'm sure they're a little disappointed on how the season went. I mean, it's always one thing about trying to build something here, but they were hurt by injuries. I mean, they had two of the top forwards that they took in the draft just went down, only played about 30 games each, and that probably hurt a lot of their season this year. And other than that, I think it was just about getting young guys more playing time for them. And I think for the most part, they just need more time to grow, really.
I think a lot of us were a bit confused on the direction of the team after they didn't take some of the top stars. Like, they could have had Tarasenko as a Kraken right now, and they didn't take him. There's someone like Shane Gostisbehere, who Dom picked as the star of the Coyotes this year in our Coyotes video. They could have had him on their team, and they didn't take these guys. So we thought, okay, that's fine, take the rebuild route. But then they signed free agents like Jaden Schwartz and Philip Grobauer. I just don't understand the direction of the team, but it seems like after trading away Mark Giordano, they're going to start going the rebuild route now. But I guess better late than never.
Yeah, I think for a young team, honestly, are they just trying to fill up their prospect pool and really just get more bodies into the building here? Or do you think that's the strategy?
It might be a matter of we want to get some young guys, but we need a few names like Jaden Schwartz to be leaders, or they have like Jordan Eberle who can be leaders on this team. So maybe they wanted to get a decent mix of young and veteran players. But interesting to see where they're going.
Yeah. It definitely is interesting. But fellas, what we like to do in part one here, we always like to call out the most valuable player in our opinions for each team. So let's do that. Who do you guys have as your MVP? Matt, I'll start with you.
My MVP for this season, kind of an under the radar guy. He only played 64 games this season, but I think in those 64 games, he was a really impactful defenseman. And he only played second pair of minutes with him as well. When he was out there, he showed. And that was Carson Soucy. Kind of an underrated guy they took in the expansion draft. A lot of people, when they took him out from Minnesota, didn't really think much of him. Thought he was kind of just a filler on the roster more so, but he showed he was way more than that. I mean, having 10 goals as a defenseman in itself is just pretty impressive. And the fact he only did that in 64 games, and he was a +7 as well. So when he was out there, he was stopping the puck, he was scoring goals. He's a great guy they can build around, and only 27 years old. He's not a free agent until next season, so they have another year of him being on the roster before they have to think about what they want to do extension wise. So yeah, he's a really big piece for them in the back end.
Yeah, Jake, how about you? Who's your MVP, and what do you think of Matt's pick? Not a lot of people, I think, would think of Matt's pick first.
Yeah, as I was going over their roster and taking a look at who did what, I think that Soucy is a very underrated guy. Perhaps top 5 most underrated in the NHL, I would dare to say, because he had a really good season on a pretty bad team, especially if you look in terms of plus and minus, which I know some people don't really respect that as much, but it does indicate how well a player did defensively. And for him, that's a great plus. I, for one, stayed on the back end, and I picked Vince Dunn, who had 7 goals, 28 assists, 35 points. He wasn't as solid defensively as Soucy. He was a minus 21. But as someone who's seen Vince Dunn play a lot of hockey as a Blues fan, this guy is just so confident. He knows how to drive play. He knows how to create scoring chances. And I think if Seattle gets even more offense and he can contribute to a better offensive team, he's just going to generate even more points. And so I think this is only the beginning for what Vince Dunn can do for Seattle. But for this year, even pretty good numbers.
Yeah, pretty fitting for you as a Blues fan to pick Vince Dunn, but obviously already is known as a leader on that team, which is something that you want, especially in an inaugural season. And when you trade away a guy like Giordano. So for me, guys, I'm going to hop up in the forward department here and pick a guy that a lot of people would probably think of first, and that is Jared McCann. When he came over to this team, I don't think people thought that he was going to be their number one guy. He put up 27 goals, 23 assists, good for 50 points. And in my opinion, that's stellar. I think Seattle has a guy right there that they can build around, especially with Matty Beniers too. I mean, they've got some pieces here, and as we're going to talk about in a little bit, they have $22 million in cap space. So that growth that Matt was alluding to is about to start this off season. So what do you guys think of Jared McCann? Did he excel your expectations?
Yeah, I think just like Vince Dunn, he's someone who he didn't have the most points, but 27 goals is nothing to scoff at. So if you can get some more offense and continue building this team, he's someone else to where you give him someone to start getting some assists from, someone who can bury the puck as well. And his points are also just going to skyrocket. So I love where this team's going for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so hey, I mentioned the offseason, fellas. Why don't we hop into part 2 and talk about the offseason, where Seattle is going to hopefully take a giant step. So as it is on cap friendly, they have about $22 million in projected cap space. So they've got plenty to work with. And they also hold the 4th overall pick in the draft, which is still a really good draft. Obviously, last season they got Matty Beniers, but they have a chance to go out and get another great young prospect who could potentially step up and play this upcoming season. We'll just have to see who they take. But fellas, what do you think the move is this offseason? Should they try to sign a star to help build this team, or should they try to sign a lot of depth pieces and try to go for some more young guys to build around? Jake, I'll start with you.
So I think that this team should continue going the route that they have been, where the guys that they have that are their stars, if you will, they're not the elite players of the NHL. They're kind of under the radar, and I think that they did that on purpose. They don't want to be anywhere in the middle of the NHL. You're not going to get good picks that way. You're not going to make the playoffs that way. They want to be toward the bottom, which is right where they're at with the guys that they drafted. So I think they continue that. They get a sort of under the radar guy in Max Domi. And Max Domi he's a bit of a journeyman at this point. He's making a little over $5 million with the Hurricanes, who I don't think will bring him back for anywhere near that price point. And I think that the Kraken might be able to get someone maybe better. I see him signing around $4 million with the Kraken. I think they could use that money to get someone else or a couple other pieces, but they can win a bid on Max Domi because no one else is probably going to give the guy $4 million at this point. But I think that he's the perfect mid-tier veteran for that lineup. He had 11 goals and 28 assists for 39 points last year. So, like I said, in that middle ground of of decency for players, but a good fit for Seattle.
Yeah, I think that Domi could be an excellent piece because, like you said, Jake, you bring in that veteran guy only for $4 million. That leaves you about $18 million left, and that's still a good chunk of change for you to do all sorts of signings and re-signings with. So, Matt, on that note, who do you have Seattle bringing in or re-signing and et cetera?
Well, I think one part of this lineup that they was really lacking last year, more so because of injury, but I think just some pure performance as well, was their wing core. I mean, outside of what we were talking about in Jared McCann, there really wasn't much scoring outside of their wing group. So I think one guy that could add to that about the same age as McCann or will be when the season comes on is Andre Burakovsky from Colorado. I think he's one guy they could look to go after. He had a really good year, really breakout season. He's hurt right now in the playoffs, which honestly could be a plus for them because he had a really good season. He had 22 goals, 39 assists for 61 points in 80 games. And since he's hurt right now in the playoffs, he hasn't had the chance to show on the national stage to maybe improve his stock, which they themselves know how good of a player he is. And I think we do as well. So, but since he hasn't been able to improve his stock a little bit, it might drive his price down a little bit. Since he is only 27, he's going to be asking for a decent bit, and coming off a good year like that, he probably will. But being injured right now might help them out when it comes to cap, even though they really don't need much of it. But he could be a guy that could slot in right up there with a Matty Beniers and have like a Jared McCann on the other side, or they could run maybe Jaden Swartz when he comes back and he's healthy next year on that wing. Anything to just add more depth to this team, because I think when we look at the roster, the defense looks okay. It looks like it's more so just filling in the pieces in the forward core and just building more and creating an identity up there of a high-scoring team. And I think Burakovsky fits perfectly in that.
Yeah, Jake, what are your thoughts on that pick? I think that's a stellar pick.
Yeah, using that same logic that I used earlier, that's another mid-tier guy. I think he fits right into the plan that Seattle has. It's just he's not going to take your team to the top, but he'll put butts in seats, and he'll be a good piece to add to their current core.
Yeah, so you guys both mentioned forwards. Do you think that they go for some more defensive depth or maybe some goaltending depth? Because honestly, I mean, did their goalies really prove much this season? I don't know. In my opinion, I don't think so. But what do you guys think about those two positions?
Yeah, I think me and Matt had actually talked about this. Matt, did you want to fill everybody in on your goaltending acquisition?
Oh, I think one guy, I don't know if it's a for sure goaltending acquisition, but I think is definitely a guy that with the cap space they have could be in play, and that's Billy Husso. I mean, it kind of fits perfectly with this type of lineup. They're already trying to build a Seattle Blues over here in the West Coast, so they might as well continue that trend and add in another blue. But in all seriousness, I mean, this guy's a really good goaltender coming off a breakout season. Yeah, it's kind of a one-year wonder type thing. I mean, he really didn't break out until this year, but he's going to be on the open market. There's going to be a lot of teams bidding for them. And if they want to throw their hat in the ring, I think they have a really good chance of bringing him in and finally getting that franchise goaltender. Because in all seriousness, Grubauer was terrible this year. I mean, it's not like it was for injury or anything. He just played really bad. And when we're looking at their defensive group, there's really no reason for that. So I think it really just comes down to the goaltending. And I think that's one they really need to address this season. I think Billy Husso fit that.
Yeah, and I think that his price is going to be right too. He's not going to be leaving St. Louis necessarily because he priced himself out. He's a great goalie, and he could demand a lot, but I don't think he's proven enough to where teams are going to be rushing to get him. I think someone like Seattle will give him a shorter term deal, say prove it, and maybe in a couple of years they re-up him to a longer term status. But the real reason why he's leaving St. Louis is because they have Chucky Sideburns in the AHL who just led his team to the Calder Cup final. So one way or another, he's got to get called up. The Blues don't need to spend the cap on Husso, and another team like Seattle is going to benefit for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there might be quite a few teams going after Billy Husso, even though he hasn't proven to be a consistent goaltender yet. But I think he definitely has the potential, and teams love potential. And I think you're right on the money there, Jake. I think he'll get a short-term deal that says prove it or you're gone. And honestly, a team like Seattle would be perfect because that is a market, unlike Arizona, that players are going to want to go to. You know, like they have a brand new stadium, brand new audience that loves to go watch their new team play. who wouldn't want to go to an environment like that, especially as a young goaltender who's trying to get an opportunity to start in the NHL long term? So with that, fellas, what about trades? Do you think Seattle could be moving some guys around to either acquire more picks or maybe some more assets?
Yeah, so I think we look at that. We say they bring in Huso. Well, then you've got a problem. You have three goaltenders. And unfortunately for them, they have Grubby, who's locked in until 2027, I think. So, and it's at 6 mil, just about. So you're not going to be able to move that contract. The guy was terrible. He had a .889 save percentage this year. He's just not good, but you're stuck with him because you put the pen to paper and you signed him for that long contract without knowing how he'd fit, which is why I think someone like Huso, they learned their lesson. They're going to bring him in short term, but you've got to open up some room in goal. And so unfortunately that guy moving out is going to be Drieger. And I do think that a team like Edmonton would be on the lookout for a goalie with Mike Smith. You don't know what's going to happen with him. And Mikko Koskinen just signed overseas, or he's rumored to have signed overseas. So they have an opening. I think maybe you get some picks back, continue to build your young depth in Seattle, and you give up Chris Drieger.
Matt, are you in agreement with Jake here? Do you think that would be the move with acquiring Huso?
Yeah, I think it got to be. I mean, there's no way you're going to keep Drieger, Huso, and Philip Grubauer on the roster. And like he said, with Grubauer being the contract that he has, you're kind of screwed. So if anybody's going to get moved, it's going to be Drieger, especially if you want to bring in a guy like Huso.
Yeah. So with that, fellas, do we have any more ideas for what they should do this offseason, or have you guys pretty much said everything that's on your mind?
Yeah, I think go ahead, Matt.
I have one guy in mind that I think they should be looking to send off, and that's a dude who only really played fourth line minutes for them in the forward group. And I was talking about, like, if you're going to bring in a Max Domi or you're going to bring in a Burakovsky, you're going to need to shed a little bit of salary cap. And I'm looking at a guy like Jonas Donskoy, who was a pretty good pickup at the time when you brought him in from the expansion draft. But he's going on. He's got one more year remaining. He's going to be a free agent after this next upcoming season. He's making 3.9, which is a lot for a fourth liner, and they only played him about 13 to 14 minutes this year. So I think he's a guy, if you want to shed a little bit of cap just to make sure you're safe to bring in those forwards, he would be a guy I'd send off. He's a decent defensive forward, and I think a good team looking to try to make or do better in the Cup next season is going to want to try to make a run for him. And I think he's a guy that could easily get rid of with his cap number.
And I think like you said, they're decent teams that would be interested and be willing to take on that contract, or potentially, Seattle retain some of that. I mean, at that point, max that they could hold would be close to 2 mil. So that wouldn't be terrible for one season for them. But yeah, I mean, a fourth liner making 4 mil is unfortunate no matter where you're at in the cap, unless you're trying to make the cap, but that's not the case for Seattle here. So Jake, thoughts on that move as well?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if they don't move him this offseason, they won't be competing next year. So they could get a juicy return for him at the trade deadline, and maybe you retain half that. I think a team would give up 2 mil, taking half that contract to get Donskoy as they make a cup run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, fellas, are we ready to move on to part 3 for next season's preview?
Let's do it.
All right, so with everything we've talked about, let's kind of discuss where we think Seattle might finish next year. I know we said that they're going to be adding a lot of pieces. They've got some cap, but is it going to be enough to where they think that they should push for the playoffs? Or is it still one of those things where they should try to be getting a good draft pick for next season as well?
I'll say I think that they're going to finish 7th in the Pacific. And the reason for that, it's either going to be 7th or 8th. Unfortunately, they're not going to be great, but I think that that's just fine for where Seattle's at. I think they're going to be competing with the Ducks for who can be worse, because the Ducks are rumored to be moving out John Gibson, and they also have a bunch of young guys that they want to let play. And I think they're also just fine being bad. So it's going to be between the Kraken and the Ducks for who is the worst in the Pacific next year.
Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I think it's either that, and I would throw another hat in the ring. I think San Jose could have a chance of being in that group as well, because they don't look like they're going to be getting better anytime soon. But yeah, I think Seattle, it's really good for them to try to look for another rebuilding year because it does look like, compared to Vegas, this is going to be a pretty long rebuild. And it's not going to take just 2 seasons. They're going to be randomly all of a sudden really good again. But I think just continue to build because, like we said before, like you said earlier in the video, it's they got to build that prospect pool. That's really a big thing for them now. Is they barely have any prospects right now in their AHL or playing, or they're already up for them now in Matty Beniers. So like, I think just about that, staying a little worse for now, staying a little content with that, and getting more prospects is a big deal for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what would you guys' thoughts be if for some reason they come out next season and they just find the rhythm early and they find themselves top 3 in the division a quarter of the way through? Do you think that would change the plans a little bit and result in more of a playoff push?
I don't know that they would be buyers by any means, but if they did decide to, if they did end up in the playoffs somehow, maybe Beniers just has a godly season. They have the pieces to where, if we looked at it in hindsight, which I guess right now is hindsight, but I don't think it would be that shocking to see a team that has, if they make the acquisition, say they get Max Domi and Burakovsky, like Matt said, they've got some solid pieces on that team. They're not building to be like Edmonton, who has McDavid and Draisaitl on top. They're building, and like Matt said earlier, they're the St. Louis Blues of the Pacific because they're just a depth-filled team, and that's what they built for. So I think it would be fun to see. I think they're going to be a fun team regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, as we wrap up this video, fellas, do you have any other comments or concerns? All right. Well, hey, everyone, thank you for tuning into this video. Let us know in the comments below what you think Seattle's offseason might look like. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time on Winamac Hockey.